Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. I'm happy to welcome you to this webinar on how you can boost your building's Rick Hansen Foundation certified accessibility rating with accessible technology. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Cassandra and I'm the marketing coordinator here at Precise ParkLink. I'm also happy to be here with you today as your moderator. Joining me today is Andrew Scorlon, Technical Sales Support Manager here at Precise ParkLink. Also here with us today is Samantha Prohl, Technical Accessibility Specialist and Principal of ABE Factors. And finally, also here with us today is guest speaker Yvonne Gevrink, Manager of Business Services for Mackenzie Health Hospital. There are a few things I would like to address before we get started. Please enter your name and organization in the Q&A chat to enter into our prize draw. The winner will be announced on Precise ParkLink's LinkedIn shortly after the webinar, so stay tuned. We will also be accepting questions in the chat as well, so be sure to enter your questions as well as who you're addressing it to in the chat. On the agenda for today, we'll be discussing Canadian accessibility requirements and the importance of accessibility for buildings and their parking facilities. We will also be taking a look at a recent case study on the new Cortellucci Vaughan Hospital and why they chose to invest in the new kiosk line. Then we're going to dive into more about the new Skidata kiosk line, Canada's first fully accessible parking pay stations. We will also take a look at ABE Factors review of the kiosk line and how it aligns with parking accessibility compliance. Then we're going to touch on how your organization can go the extra mile to comply with Canadian requirements. And finally, we'll finish off today's webinar with a live Q&A session. Again, if you just logged on, be sure to enter your name and organization into the chat to enter today's prize draw. I'll pass it on to Samantha from ABE Factors to take it from here.
Hey everyone. Again, my name is Samantha Prohl and I'm so glad to be here. Thank you, Precise ParkLink and Cassandra for having me. Today, I just wanted to start off by saying I'm a technical accessibility specialist. I have spent the last decade of my career dedicated to navigating the accessibility codes, standards, legislation, and regulations all across Canada when it comes to the built environment. Now, the Canadian market update, accessibility is such a huge topic here in Canada, being that we just introduced the Accessible Canada Act, but we're talking a lot more about the built environment. That said, we're not here to talk about buildings today. We're here to talk about the technology and the kiosks that are being implemented into the built environment, but don't necessarily, they're not necessarily regulated right now by the building code or other items. So let's get into it. I always like to start off with a few statistics just to show you the reality and the impact of having accessibility or accessible technology such as an accessible pay station within your facilities. So over 50% of adults have or have experienced a permanent or temporary physical disability. Over 50% of adults live with or care for someone who has a disability. Now, we're not saying that this discussion today is all about making components or technology accessible for people with disabilities, because a lot of the time when we make things accessible, we're improving the journey and the experience for everyone, disability or not. Now, accessibility benefits all. If we talk about pay stations in general, how can we make our customers' journey easier? When we provide multiple payment options, so when you have tap to go, when you can use credit card insertion, cash payment, mobile payment, online payment, but when we also combined the easy use of the technology with how we find the technology. So is it in a safe and convenient location? Do we have signage that allows us to navigate or know where the parking pay kiosks are? It makes the journey all the difference. When you as a facility or building owner, building management company invest in accessible parking pay stations, It's beneficial to everyone. You're creating an inclusive, sustainable facility. You're saying, welcome visitors, welcome employees. Everyone can use our facilities and feel comfortable from the time they access the building, pay for their parking, and enter their building. Not to mention, you can maximize your revenue capture. What does this mean? It means that if everyone is capable of paying for parking, everyone can pay for parking. Whether or not you choose to compensate people with disabilities and say they don't have to pay for parking, that's one thing. But if you just want everyone to have an easy experience from the time they enter the site, you can allow everyone the option to pay for parking without putting them in the position of having to find assistance, having to find support, having to call someone, and wasting time in their day in order to leave or even get into the parking pay station before they go on with their day. So it really does improve access for everyone. Now, why go the extra lengths? So currently, technically speaking, accessible parking pay stations aren't covered by the building code because the building code only regulates things that form part of the physical building, not say kiosks or equipment that you install within a building. When it comes to federal projects, for example, if we use the Canadian Transportation Agency, if you're looking at the CTA accessibility guidelines or requirements, they now require that if you have an interactive kiosk on site, that it be accessible. And they're going to pinpoint you or move you over to CSA standards. By doing so at a federal level, this is again increasing your capability of people paying for parking and for anybody and everybody being able to easily pay for parking to avoid those poor experiences. Not to mention, there's one thing to meet the minimum building code, which you have to do, which is compliance, right? But to meet guidelines or standards that aren't regulated through entities like the CTA, why do it? But the new mindset is to go above and beyond to just create better, more meaningful access for everyone. Now, I've mentioned the Accessible Canada Act a few times. For those of you who aren't aware, Bill C-81 was passed in July of 2019, or when it received royal assent, meaning we had our first accessibility legislation get passed. And to put this in comparison, the United States has had the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act, since 1990. So Canada is only getting their first accessible act across the nation 30 years later. Not to mention, it's only going to impact people at a federal level. That said, there's numerous committees and numerous teams that are now forming part of the Accessible Standards Canada team to develop regulations. Now, when you have an act, you need legislation, you need regulations to come of that in order to create some teeth for people actually need to abide by something. If you don't or aren't covered by the federal legislation, then you don't necessarily need to meet those guidelines. Now, on a provincial level, if provinces have accessibility legislation, you might again need to provide accessible kiosks. But the way we're moving and the new changes to even the National Building Code, the National Model Code of Canada, it's not long before entities like this or universal design is approached in such a way that all controls or all devices that are used by people when accessing a building should be accessible. I also mentioned CSA, so the Canadian Standards Association. Now, we keep using the Canadian Transportation Agency as an example because their ATPDR states that if you're going to have a interactive kiosk, that it needs to comply with CSA B651.2, accessible design for self-service interactive devices. Within that standard, anything built environment related, so the approach, the control heights, etc., are all going to be covered or relayed back to CSA B651, accessible design for the built environment. And in this case, these are the things that dictate how accessible something has to be. So if we go back to the CTA, it says that, and let's use pay stations as an example. It says that if you have a pay station, it needs to be accessible. Or if it's not going to provide all those things, you have to have an alternative accessible means to providing the exact same or equal level of assistance. So that means you either have to rely on in-person assistance somewhere nearby, or something that we're going to get into, which is really great about Precise ParkLink's the kiosk line, is that they've built in virtual assistants. So they are getting that alternative or equivalent level of support that you could get from an in-person interaction. And probably a reason why you might have tuned in today is to learn a little bit more about the Rick Hansen Foundation Accessibility Certification. So the RHFAC ratings. Now, RHFAC ratings are very similar to a LEED style approach to certifying a building, except we don't look at the energy levels of a building. We look at and measure the level of meaningful access throughout the built environment. Now, numerous buildings all across Canada are getting these RHFAC ratings in order to certify them as accessible or even gold accessible. You're going to identify key areas of items for the removal of barriers, and it's going to make suggestions so that you can actually provide helpful solutions to people that not only impact the building, but if you can allow more people to access your buildings, you're building upon community connections and potential economic growth by making your environment more accessible so that more people can come and use your goods and services. Now, when it comes to parking pay stations, you can't actually rate just a product. However, if there's a parking pay station that forms part of the built environment of the building being rated, then parking pay stations are one of the features that's going to be assessed. And there's numerous items of criteria that determine whether or not a parking pay station is accessible or not. So, yeah, we can keep going. Thanks. So again, the difference between now an RHFAC rating, if you're 60% or less, you're not deemed accessible certified. So it's technically a fail. If you're 60% to 100%, you can be accessible certified. And then in order to be gold, you need to be 80% and above and meet mandatory gold criteria. So enhanced provisions. You're also eligible for innovation points. So brownie points if you do something above and beyond the RHFAC criteria. For example, if you have a parking pay station and it's really accessible, you can get full points. Now, if we take it back to one of these kiosks that we're going to talk about, because it has the virtual assistance, two-way communication, video interaction bit, you would be eligible for innovation points. So that's brownie points. So if you lost points somewhere, those innovation points can actually bring up the average, which can be the difference between 79% and 80%, and potentially putting you into that gold threshold. But there's a lot that goes into. Now, you wouldn't think it'd be like this critical, but it really is. You need to think about accessible parking pay stations in a holistic approach. So it doesn't just take Precise ParkLink. It takes involving the manufacturer and having them be involved and understand the universal design or even the accessibility criteria that needs to be met in order to make an accessible pay station. So that's one entity, but you also have to think about the building owners, building managers, property managers, etc. Because once it's out of their hands, once you've purchased it, or even if you're a designer and you're implementing it into the built environment, you need to make sure that accessible pay station is located in an accessible environment, that people can get to it easily and that people can find it easily. So you have to build the right team of professionals, such as incorporating, Precise ParkLink, who knows what accessible pay stations are all about, to myself, having a technical accessibility consultant come on, or previously, prior to all this, Rick Waters from Enable Inc., he did a preliminary accessibility assessment. He kind of brought in that lived experience and tested it and provided the meaningful access level of criteria plus your property and facility managers to all bring it together to make sure that people are capable of paying for parking in an easy and effortless way. Now, what makes a parking pay station accessible? You want to think about things like hardware and software. Is the machine easy to interact with? I can't tell you the number of times, and I don't self-identify as having a disability, and I still can't tell you the amount of times that I've been trapped in a parkade because I can't figure out the parking ticket machine, or it's lagging in time, or I pressed the wrong button and now it's queuing me out, or it's timed out, etc. And I feel like a lot of you might have also had that experience. But if you can make that software easy to follow by implementing things like instructions, graphics, and things that actually show people and interpret information in different ways so that you can do the flow through and finish your transaction easily, while also putting it in a location that I can physically get to, physically find, en route to the entrance of the building, you're already changing the way someone interacts with the environment when they get on site.
Thank you so much for that, Samantha. That was great. There's no doubt that accessibility is a pivotal topic that is sparking change across Canada. I'm now happy to hand it off to Yvonne from Cordalucci Vaughan Hospital on her experience with SCADA's accessible kiosk technology.
Thank you, Cassandra. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me today. I'm here today to talk about Mackenzie Health and also our new newly hospital, Cordalucci Vaughan Hospital, that has recently opened back in February as a COVID pivot hospital to support the pandemic. If you want to go to the next screen. Okay. So first of all, the Cordalucci Vaughan Hospital is one of Canada's first smart hospital. We're hoping to open it very soon as the COVID case numbers go down. We did open back in February to support the pandemic. Essentially, we have critical care, and we have 2 units right now that are supporting all the COVID patients in the province that are directed there by the ministry. The Cordalucci Vaughan Hospital is rather large. It's 1.2 million square foot, and a capacity holds up to 350 beds, which is essentially 80% are private rooms. So that's why kind of when you drive by, it looks quite large. Prior to the Cordalucci Vaughan Hospital at the Richmond Hill site, we did implement the Power Cash pay stations back in 2019, which are compliant. And then therefore, prior to opening up the Cordalucci Vaughan Hospital, Precise ParkLink presented a new pay station called Kiosk that we assessed the different selling points. Essentially, it was the accessibility features that led us to change the pay stations at the Cordalucci Vaughan Hospital. Some of the key selling points were rather than relying on a cut down base, it reorganizes the face of the unit to make the controls easier for anyone to use. It also has a massive 2-part color screen that literally shifts the user interface to the bottom portion of the screen when activated. So any patient in a wheelchair, it made it much easier for them to utilize a pay station. It also had the raised images and the braille on the decals, which again helped support any disabled patient that required those features. The coin inlet was also in a much better spot on this unit, so made it much more accessible for all various types of patients. It also has the bigger screen, and it was much easier to read versus the Power Cash that's in at the Richmond Hill site. The screen is 2-part. It can run our own information from the hospital, and also we're looking at running foundation ads, as well as looking at other ads that can generate revenue for the hospital. And more recently, when deploying these pay stations at the Vaughan Hospital, we did find out that they also have a smaller footprint than the Power Cash pay stations, which would take up less space within the hospital. Other than that, we are quite happy with the pay stations in use. They're working very well. The added features, the senior management team did make the decision as a smart hospital. It would make best sense to go with the new upgraded pay stations to support the smart hospital vision.
Thank you for that, Yvonne. That was very informative. It was refreshing to see how Cordalucci Vaughan Hospital has become the first hospital in Canada to feature fully integrated smart technology systems. I'm happy to hand it off to Andrew from Precise ParkLink to discuss a bit more about the Skiosk family line, Canada's first fully accessible class of parking pay stations.
Hello, everyone. Samantha and Yvonne have made my life a little bit more difficult because you've expressed the points that we really, adhere to with this new product line on the Skiosk, Skidata Skiosk product line from there. Within Skiosk, this is a new product offering from Skidata, the distributor. There's multiple facets of these devices. There's three devices here, and they meet all Canadian accessibility criteria. We've worked directly with Samantha on this. A new design, very modern look to it, but more importantly, Skiosk has digital payment options that they've evolved from on our previous generation devices. They've taken customizable controls. As Yvonne mentioned, it's a fully touch screen. All the devices are within the 1200 millimeter interaction point, but they've taken it to the next level in regards to the scalable platform on it. We've added raised decals, tactile decals, braille on the devices themselves. Our EMB devices, the chip and pin units, all meet the criteria required by the CSA code regulations. Just an overview of the devices themselves. This is the Skiosk Smart device. This device accepts all cash payments and contactless credit card payments as well. Pretty self-explanatory. Again, new design element on it. The ability to showcase advertisements, information. You no longer need rate cards on the machine because it's all digitized on it. So it's very customizable in that retrospect. We also have the ability of doing remote customer service, which we've had before with our iPark department, which is 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. But we all now have the ability with onboard camera to interact with the CSR agents that we have, and they're able to see you as well. Right to the point that we remotely connect into the device, we can actually select options for the customer if they can't find it, where the lost ticket is, or if they want to purchase a special pass, or if they've lost their ticket. Depending on the integrations on site, we can reproduce that ticket through a license plate recognition system, or we can just send a variable rate ticket to the machine itself. As was mentioned, it's a 21-inch high-resolution full HD screen, all touch enabled. We can lower the screen to meet the parameters of accessibility height requirements. So the beauty of this device is it's one device that can serve all purposes depending on what your needs are. Again, it's a touch screen that you can just lower it, and the interaction point gets to the point that you need to utilize it at that standpoint. Even with the bill acceptor and the coin acceptor, again, everything was thought out in regards to height parameters on the code from the CSA code itself. The Skiosk Lite is, pretty much exactly like the Skiosk Smart, other than it only accepts contactless payment, credit card only, flash debit. mobile wallets, you name it. And it's a device that we could actually sell different types of passes from, a much smaller footprint, same size screen, just pretty much half the size because it doesn't have the need for recycling coin or banknotes in the machine itself. Now, this is also a brand new product line called the Skiosk Slim. It says Skiosk Smart on the top, but it is a Skiosk Slim device. Again, very modern design, meets all the requirements for height restrictions and touch points. It's exact same screen, just a completely different design, maybe would blend in more into a commercial office environment, but serves all the same purposes other than, you know, it doesn't have the coding mechanisms inside of it. So it's printed on thermal paper and all the tickets are scanned on the device itself. So the beauty of SkiData is all the tickets from the main entrance points are all on barcodes. So, you know, there's it's not necessary to insert the ticket into these mechanisms. So we can just scan it and the fee will show up on the screen with all the instructions in regards to how to use it and all your payment options. And it's all customizable. So it all depends on what your customer logos are, or if you want to have a different message on it or utilize an advertisement on the screen, we have the capability of doing that with these products. So the burning question, what makes these devices accessible? I think a lot of those items have been touched upon. You know, accessibility is an important consideration in the design of all products that we release with Precise itself, the environments, facilities, because it affects usability for people with the widest possible range of capabilities. Many accessibility features benefit those who do not have a disability by enhancing usability and providing possibilities for the customized design. We take into account like everyone utilizing the machines, we're all the same. We want to be able to provide a product that serves all those purposes. And that's the main reason why we spent all this time and energy on designing a product that, you know, we don't have to put multiple products out there. One product serves the purpose of it all. And also, you know, with all these softwares that we've been developing in the back end in regards to our parked in features, I'm not sure if anyone's aware of those, but we have mobile payment options that, you know, you can leverage using your cell phone to make payments for a parking ticket. And it helps with the accessibility aspect in mind. And during the COVID times now, the touchless options as well. At this point, I'll let our technical accessibility expert explain. Samantha, if you can take it from here, that would be great.
Sure, thanks, Andrew. So as Andrew was saying, we've been working with Precise ParkLink with their Skiosk line. And what Rick Waters out of Enable Inc. was able to start with was a preliminary accessibility assessment. So looking at this kiosk from a very generic perspective. And then what we did is we took the specifications, we looked at the machines, and we did a very highly detailed report in regards to every single compliance factor for CSA B651.2. And then we also listed the criteria for RHFAC and a few of the items for CSA B651. Now, because we're only focusing on the product itself, a lot of it had to do with the technology, the placement of controls, and their initiatives or their activation keys versus the built environment, because we don't know, and we weren't working with the client end, right? So we don't know where they're going to be installed. But Precise ParkLink has that information now so that they can set their client up for the best accessible journey for their parking pay station going forward. Now, when we take that 360 holistic approach, again, it's all about making sure that you have multiple payment options. And Andrew touched on that a bit, like touchless payment, mobile payment, et cetera, kind of like what I said in the beginning. But it also comes down to the interactivity of the device and where it's located within the built environment, right? Is it served by an accessible path of travel? Do I have to go through doors in order to get to it? Are they automatic? What kind of customer service comes with it? So if I'm having difficulty with the machine, where am I going to go to get additional support? Or can the machine itself provide me with that customer service immediately, such as with that interactive two-way communication option that this kiosk line has? Not to mention your signage, wayfinding, and providing things such as Braille. Now, it's not to say that an individual who has vision loss is driving and so that they're going to go pay for parking. So why would you include Braille? Again, we're trying to be inclusive for everyone. There's people with low vision, but also what if they're the passenger and they want to pay for parking, right? There's not just, we can't say or rule out anyone who's going to be paying for parking, and therefore it should be accessible to everyone. Now, another thing is on the actual interactive device itself, when we use the universal design principle of perceptible information, we're trying to say, can everybody and anybody interpret the information and use that information? As in, if you only have buttons to select from and use, will everybody understand how to use the buttons? But if you provide graphics, such as at your card insertion slot, show an image of someone inserting a card or how to insert that card if it has to be up, facing up or facing down. Things like that really enhance the overall user experience. Now, the core 4 interaction elements to consider is, again, location and environment. How are people going to get to it? And I also want to say, if you're going to provide an accessible path of travel to a parking kiosk that's located outside, now, if you're somewhere in BC and you know it rains a lot, why don't you try or providing shelter over top of it, right? So people don't have to stand in the rain while they're trying to pay for parking. Think about the environment you're in. If you know you're in a colder zone, put it somewhere where there's heating nearby or within that space. Now, interactive hardware components, interactive software components, instructions and prompts. And it was really great working with Andrew the entire time on this, because there were so many nitty-gritty components that we had to discuss. And they're also working back and forth with their manufacturer. So you can always provide the hardware, provide the software, but they are working very hard to make sure that their software can stay up to date and universal over time. Not to mention create better ways for people to interact with the device and just make paying for parking that much easier with, easier instructions and prompts, split screen, accessible options, and a flow through where the transaction takes you from one step to the other. Now, making it easy to navigate and use the device, right? So directional signage. If you're driving into a site, you park your car and you have to pay for parking, can you see that parking pay station from the parking space? If it's not within visual line of sight, there should be a need for wayfinding and signage to direct people to that pay station, as well as instructions on what to expect. Do I have to go pay for the ticket, bring it back to the car? Do I need a ticket at all, or is it going to be electronic? Provide more information so people know what to do. The ground level or floor surface. If it's going to be accessible, it can't be located up steps. It shouldn't be located at the top of a ramp, right? Or blocking an obstruction. A lot of the time when I'm doing these building assessments, I also see them like just off to the side of a curb ramp, leaving no flat level landing for someone who might use a mobility device to roll up to. They shouldn't have to put on their brake or fear rolling backwards while trying to make a payment. Optimal surrounding space for easier interaction and departure. Make sure it's located or recessed off of the primary path of travel so it's not interrupting the flow of traffic or pedestrians passing back and forth. And also increase accessibility with sheltered devices. And I kind of touched upon that. If it's in a colder area, provide heat. If you know that people are going to be outside or these are going to be stationed outside, then provide a level of protection to make that transaction easier. So let's get into the interactive hardware components a little bit. Now, there's a full touch display, there's a scroll bar and height adjustable screen. And again, if a client opts to have this remote 24/7 assistance or customer service or virtual assistance, what have you, if someone isn't capable of using a touch screen, there is a button or assistance button off to the side that allows people to prompt that service. There's also glare-free display. There's nothing worse than when you place a parking pay station in under direct lighting and the glare is so bad that you're trying to duck, you're trying to read the screen. But in this case, there's actually an application over the screen to make sure that it's glare-free. But it also goes to where you're going to install it. And this is why you might also want to provide shelter. If it's going to be in direct contact with sunlight, sometimes you can't avoid a glare on the screen. So providing shelter will make sure that the screen is much easier to read. High resolution, full HD, meaning all the information is legible. You also want to make sure your text is legible. Working with Precise ParkLink, we know that they've increased their text size or made it that max smallest size to ensure that the legibility is there when you're up close. Audible and visual prompts, as well as zoom in function. Now, this is something that that's being worked on as to whether or not you can actually touch the screen, zoom it in, zoom it out. But sometimes that might be another option that you can have integrated into the software. Now, remember, when you're working with someone or you're thinking about purchasing a parking pay station, you're going to be provided with a list of additional add-ons. Like anything, there's a base model, and then there's additional items that you can tack on. So if you want to be the most universal parking pay station, there's many, many options that can actually make the user experience that much better. Now, touchscreens also avoid the twist and turn of controls. And Andrew had mentioned that with the split screen or the accessible component, all of the information can be lowered to an accessible height level. We also have hardware components. So we've talked a bit about cashless payment options, tap and go, scan and go, hand wave activation, automated insert functionality. I mean, these kiosks can really allow you to pay in any which way. And lastly, there's interactive software components. So fostering independence and readily available assistance. Assistive listening systems are special amplifiers that enable audio frequency induction loop compatible hearing aids. So it's essentially meaning that it's compatible with someone who uses hearing aids or cochlear implants, as well as audio headphone plug. Now, this one was a tough one. Originally, this kiosk didn't come with the headphone jack, but now that is one of the add-on options that's available. So someone can literally plug in and have audio instructions, prompt them of how to complete their transaction. We've talked about the customer service. Adding that 24/7 virtual customer service is a wonderful option in that you can see the person because there's video relay. You can hear the person because there's two-way communication. And it's as if, or equally as good as someone being in front of you and talking you through, or better yet, taking you through your entire transaction. They can literally take over the screen from what you're doing and provide you with an easier way or faster way of finishing your transaction. And then the self-service interactivity, right? So he talked a little bit about a barcode scanner, a print at home, reservation codes, mobile payment. Thinking about all of these options makes it convenient for anybody and everybody who wants to pay for parking in advance or pay for parking when they arrive on site or pay for parking as they're leaving a site. The great thing about universal design and accessibility is providing options to everybody so that it's adaptable in the way in which they need it. And then there's the instructions, the prompts, the visibility. So again, providing that perceptible information. as per the universal design principles, allowing people to have graphics, pictograms, symbols, text, legible text, raised text, so that it has that tactile component, but also thinking about color contrast, right? So can you actually visibly see the text on the background? Can you see the symbol? And being consistent with those shapes. By allowing people to have this different information, you allow people to follow the prompts or interpret the labels as they should. Now, another great component is illumination. So each transaction component, as you're working through the payment system, will illuminate when you're using it. And it will stop illuminating if it's not ready for that prompt yet, or as you move through each of the items to complete your transaction.
Thank you so much for that, Samantha. It was wonderful to learn how these kiosks meet parking accessibility compliance. I'm going to pass it off to Andrew to close on how Precise ParkLink is committed to ensuring our products continue to meet and exceed Canadian accessibility standards.
Sorry about that. As already been stated by Samantha and everyone else on talking today, you know, Precise, we are responsible in regards to this. It's a huge initiative for us to make sure that these products meet and exceed the standards out there in the marketplace. We all have to understand that accessibility standards vary across the world. You know, even within our own province, it's interesting between Toronto, Mississauga, Ottawa, and so forth. But we're trying to meet the happy medium here and being able to provide a product that meets all the standards depending on, you know, the needs that you have in the jurisdiction that you require this equipment at. You know, we deal with a lot of federal agencies as well, and that was the big initiative and push to meet and beat these standards so we can offer this product line to all our customers across Canada, and you know, be able to allow the accessibility of these products across all levels. Massive team. Our research and development division is our core. They're the people behind the scenes that actually design all these software integrations that we've been discussing. You know, whatever our wish lists are, we bring it to their attention, and we all have these internal discussions, and that's the amazing thing about Precise is we have our own R&D team, and we can bring all these items to the table and what our customers are asking and requiring from us. And we create these solutions. We're not having to go back to a manufacturer. And essentially we become, you know, we are the software developers of these integrations, and we maximize what we can do in a short period of time. But internally, we're testing the equipment. We're proudly 100% Canadian. We stand by that. That, you know, the items that we support are all from our internal team and not outsourced to any other vendors. Again, the hardware and software integrations, you know, just in a nutshell, the majority of these items have been discussed, but, you know, we've lowered the base height on these devices. You know, we needed to make them fall within the criteria of the accessibility standards. We fully integrated the EMV's chip and pin and tap and go through our R&D team. Our headphone jack, we have that ability for that integration to have, you know, instructions shown on the screen, but also through an audio if required by our client themselves. Our reservation and validation system is a solution that we've created in the back end that you have the ability to reserve parking at your facility or validate parking through a third-party QR barcode that can be easily distributed and used on all our terminals, from the entry devices, the exit devices, and also these pay on flips. Instructional graphics on the display We have a creative services and design team that can work with you in regards to how you'd want the graphics to be adjusted if needed. We have our standards as well, and we can utilize that. Integration with mobile payment, I touched on that just very briefly. Our parked-in solution, essentially giving you the pay on foot in your hands. You don't have to utilize a pay station. You can just make your payment from your cell phone. There's no app to actually download. It just takes you to a payment page. You make your payment online, and it then sends the information back to the database. You insert your ticket, or you scan your ticket at the exit, and then you can leave the facility. And then also the hand wave options. We've incorporated at our entry and exit terminals, if needed, that there is no interaction for touchless. So you just pretty much wave your hand in front of the device. A ticket will be dispensed accordingly, and you can, park into the facility, and you can do the exact same thing at the exit as well. These are just some images of our monitoring station that we have. It's constantly evolving. I believe we're on probably the 4th revision of this. We are unbelievably proud of this the solution that we can provide to all our customers. Again, everything is monitored in-house, backed up by external generators. We're always on. We're always there to provide customer service, assistance, and for safety of your facilities as well. We always have eyes on your facility. If something arises, we can attend to it and we can service you. And we're very customizable depending on what your needs are. If it's only during the evening or certain times of the day, we can provide you a solution for that.
Thank you so much to all the speakers and the attendees for participating in today's webinar. We'll now be addressing all questions in the chat, starting with a question for Samantha. Are you aware of any insurance companies that provide any discounted rates on liability premiums to facilities that are accessibility credited?
I wish I did. Unfortunately, at this time, I don't, but it's not to say that you shouldn't bring that up as additional knowledge when getting these items insured.
Great. If anyone else has any questions, you can now enter them in the chat. We'll give everyone a few moments.
I mean, who knew there could be so much to talk about when it comes to pay stations, but I just want to step in and say thank you to yourself, Cassandra, and Andrew, and working with your team. It has been absolutely wonderful, and to see how innovative you are and your efforts towards creating kiosks that are universal and accessible and adaptable to people's needs. It's really been a wonderful experience, and just to see how proactive you've been in implementing compliance and going above and beyond, it's commendable.
Thank you for that, Samantha. I think we have a question for Andrew. Can the Braille instructions be incorporated on current equipment?
Absolutely. Raised tactile Braille can be incorporated on the around the bill acceptor, the ticket scanner, the coding mechanism that you insert your tickets on, and also the coin. It absolutely is available. I would recommend that you have that discussion with your sales representative, or someone can contact me as well. I have no problem providing that input and giving you some suggested solutions.
Great. Again, thank you to both the speakers and attendees for an insightful discussion surrounding the importance of accessibility in today's parking and mobility space. If you haven't already, please enter your name and your organization name in the chat for a chance to enter a prize draw. We'll be releasing the winner shortly after today's webinar. We will now also be following up with an email that you can respond to if any other questions do arise. And that's a wrap for today, everyone. Thank you again.